So I guess you guys beat the one Grizz fan that was here last night. So this is gonna be good. Steve, I'm ready. During the winter of my junior year in college, I sat in my rusty Forester on the side of the road in Colstrip, Montana. I'd been in town all day talking with residents about their relationship to the local power plant for a story I was reporting on energy transition in the state, and I had been warned to leave when people started gathering at the Ace Hardware after hearing a journalist was in town. Up until this point, the only real controversy I'd encountered as a reporter was finding myself in the middle of some love triangles while interviewing other 10-year-olds about playground drama for the 5th grade extreme. I was green. 4 years later, what feels like a few lifetimes in newsroom years, I've interviewed the governor of our state while he perched 10 feet above me on the seat of a tractor he didn't know how to drive. I chronicled a storm of protesters that shut down a county health department meeting during the pandemic. I stood my ground when big shot developers tried to intimidate me into rearranging the facts of my stories. And I've handed tissues across the table for countless community members bravely sharing the most important stories of their lives so I could share them with others. And it's all given me perspective that girl on the side of the road in Colstrip didn't quite have. The people in Colstrip were skeptical about an out-of-towner swooping in to tell their stories, and for good reason. When it comes to news, intimacy matters in getting the story right. Trust and proximity matter when you're trying to build a narrative that actually reflects the community you're reporting on, but it's something we're losing. You see, the conditions of our greater media environment are shriveling rural Montana into a patchwork of news deserts, geographical areas that have little to no access to and coverage of credible local information. These news deserts are what's left behind in the perfect storm of mass consolidations and closures of small-town papers across America, the struggle to keep up with the digital revolution, and a lack of local revenue to support local news outlets, as well as the subsequent cutting back of newsrooms to overworked and underpaid skeleton crews. These maps from Northwestern's 2023 State of Local News report give a good visual sense of how this breaks down in Montana and the US. Even more sparse are what the report identifies as ethnic outlets, which cover specific ethnic communities. In Montana, it recognizes one, Charcusta News on the Flathead Reservation. In a piece I assigned him 2 years ago, Dennis Swibold, a former professor of mine from the University of Montana and one of the reigning experts on Montana's news history and present, wrote how despite stalwart institutions maintaining promise, community journalism in our state is threatened. Swibold wrote that news is an intimate and crucial ingredient in the glue that binds such communities together. He also quoted news researcher Penelope Muse Abernathy, who reminds us that truth of the matter is, who I elect to the school board affects me much more than who I vote for president. That's why we've got to get back to rebuilding local news in these struggling communities. This is what's at risk, the very bond of community itself. We see this in stats, but we also know it through anecdotes. During my reporting for a profile of Senator John Tester last year, I interviewed his longtime friend and supporter, Walter Schweitzer, a third-generation Montana farmer and the president of the Montana Farmers Union. In our conversation, Walter lamented the loss of civil coffee shop discourse that's long been a staple of community for him where he lives in Geyser, Montana. Conversations that were once a reflection of neighbors' shared experiences became garbled regurgitation from national media headlines. Walter says this is because there aren't really other options for folks. We need community voices that share high school basketball game box scores, birthdays and obituaries, school board minutes, and stories of the lives of people you wave to above the steering wheel, not only the polarizing drama of people who live thousands of miles away. And we need people who take care of our stories because they're their stories too. In a workshop I attended last fall on reporting on domestic violence, a former Bozeman Chronicle Cops and Courts reporter shared wisdom from her tenure on that beat. She talked about the responsibility she assumed when writing stories about victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, about how she tried to imagine them as her mother or her sister to make sure she handled them with care. I know this is true because my story was one of those stories she told back then. And it wasn't just my story. It was the story of my trauma-stricken community, a community this reporter cared about, one she was adjacent to. So hear this. Our community news is threatened, but it's not extinct. As important as it is to address this growing gap, part of the solution is recognizing these stalwart news sources of Montana, as well as new outlets that are innovating ways to provide local coverage in an evolving industry. Take Montana Free Press, for example, a nonprofit digital news source whose reporters work tirelessly to spread credible, quality news across the state, including through the use of local freelance reporters from all over, especially equipped to tell local stories. Montana is also richer in community journalism through outlets like Montana Public Radio and the Daily Montanan, as well as programs from the University of Montana School of Journalism that I got to participate in and learn from, programs that provide state election and legislature news to outlets across Montana, as well as an annual Native News initiative. So here's my two-part appeal to you. As a citizen of Montana, as a member of your community, demand better information. Ask questions of the sources of information you subscribe to. Challenge yourself to a varied news diet, one that includes sources of information that reflect your community. And most importantly, seek out and support those that are working to water Montana's news deserts with local information. Subscribe and donate if you can. Read past the headline, and share with your community members. In a time when we're asked to make consequential decisions about our communities, ground yourself in your local reality. Thank you.